It seems that Sony is having one of those moments where you F around and you find out. Or at least it feels like it's the beginning of one of those. Despite expecting a record-breaking fiscal year for PS5, they've now reached back into history and decided to pull out, of all things, a few pages from the old Xbox One manual. You see, back when Xbox attempted their own disaster, it was 24-hour mandatory check-ins, DRM rules that caused issues within the used games market, mandatory Connect bundles, and privacy issues surrounding an always-listening microphone. These days with Sony, not much has changed. We now have 14-day DRM, variable rate pricing, and we're seeing this current intense push to destroy the secondhand and physical markets. And if history has shown us anything, it's that what Xbox tried way back then was immensely unpopular. And although they backtracked on much of it, between their anti-consumer rules and Sony capitalizing on their mistakes with one of the internet's dirtiest dunks of all time, that whole thing instantly destroyed that generation of Xbox. And to this day, it's a move they've never truly recovered from. Something that many are expecting Sony to experience come 2027 into 2028, and we'll soon see. Of course, as gamers and the markets have evolved, things have changed at Sony, which, by the way, is a major theme for today's video. Change. We've seen Shuhei Yoshida, the star of that 17-second How to Share Your Disc on PlayStation instructional video, recently come out and explain that he's a totally digital consumer now, while also explaining that even though he didn't know ahead of time what Sony was planning with their push to all digital by 2028, he also went on to say that not having a physical disc isn't a big deal. Now, some of the shocking comments Yoshida went on to record as saying were, quote, "Personally, I'm a totally digital consumer. I don't want to manage disc or swap disc. I want all my games on my dashboard, and I just want to select a game and play it, so I'm completely digital." He also said, even with physical disc games, in most cases, developers are constantly updating and adding games data anyway. Anyone who chooses to purchase a physical version will still need to download new patches, DLC, or updates. So, not having a disc, I don't understand if it's such a big issue. Now, I say that Yoshida's comments are shocking, and they truly are, because they are coming directly from the man who was at the helm of PlayStation when Xbox tried all that bullshit with the Xbox One, and it was Yoshida himself who was in that famous How to Share Your Games on PlayStation video. And to see him now turn a complete 180 and to say, I'm a digital guy, and games are basically online anyways, so I don't know, guys, what's the big deal? You know, for many, it felt like this once revered PlayStation boss had turned to the dark side, delivering what can only be described as a knife in the back of the physical games movement. The very movement, by the way, he championed in the PS4 days. And as expected, there was some very direct responses from the gaming community. As this one simply states, many people found out today that their GOAT is washed. Physical versus digital wasn't the only comment Yoshida ruffled a few feathers with, as he also weighed in on the affordability factor of games and how physical copies are still one of the cheapest ways to pick up games after release, going on to say this, quote, "People will be able to wait for a sale and buy the games they want at a cheaper price. I think publishers and platforms will continue to offer these opportunities for people who aren't able to pay the full price at launch." Interesting stance now in 2026 from Yoshida, right? Suggesting that players can simply wait for sales, you know, for those that can't afford the full price of a game at launch. But as we've spoken about many times here on the channel, Sony's push to kill physical media will also destroy the secondhand market, giving them a monopoly over said market. And when there is no competition, there's nobody out there to undercut your prices. And if the PlayStation Store currently charges roughly twice what gamers can find through outside sources, the odds of cheaper prices being found on the PlayStation Store once it's the only game in town, so to speak, are slim to none. And Slim just left the building, or at least it will come 2028. Seeing Yoshida pump the brakes and head in the opposite direction he stood for definitely qualifies as a change. Call it a very unexpected change. And upcoming changes are also slowly being seen and felt as PlayStation and Xbox mull over this decision as when they're going to launch their next generation of consoles, with some troubling suggestions coming through with this as well. Now, according to VGC, launching PS6 and Xbox Helix at $1,000 could lead to a nearly 40% drop in sales over 5 years, analyst warns. Now, the headline here is not the troubling part, especially so for those of you that are promoting the save physical games movement, because for many, they see this as Sony's F around and find out moment. $1,000 plus consoles, codes in a box, no more physical games, DRM, all the stuff gamers are looking at and warning big corpo that, hey, this thing you're doing over here is bad and you need to change course or else. I mean, that's kind of all expected, right? But as this article is citing an Ampere analysis report, one of this group's suggestions is the troubling bit. Ampere Analysis goes on to say that besides delaying the launch of these next-gen consoles or to offer up an innovative hardware form factor like PC hybrid, it's with this final suggestion that this group offers up their smash glass option. Quote, they could continue to aim for the 2028 window expected by analysts, but reduce the prices by making use of, listen to this, heavier hardware subsidies, new monetization models, more aggressive digital content strategies, and optimize sales channels. Translation, you can still launch the PS6 in 2028 during the height of the Rampocalypse with that insane price tag, but you could write down the price by using extra profits from new monetization models, more aggressive digital content strategies, and you get the picture here. Basically, even more microtransactions, an even greater push to keep you tied to the PlayStation ecosystem and spending money while PlayStation pushes as many advertisements and extra fees on you as they can possibly fit into the store. As Push Square reported on in their coverage of this more ads on your PlayStation home screen topic, get ready for non-gaming products like Coca-Cola and McDonald's. However, and as if this wasn't enough, when it comes down to how things are changing at Sony PlayStation, everything just mentioned isn't even touching the most recent news, as Sony is back at it, making some wild moves in terms of their studios. And make no mistake about it, they are still mired in their chase to blow their games portfolio wide open with 12 live service games, which came under the guidance at the time of Jim Ryan. With the most recent change, even seeing gaming sites that Sony has enjoyed a home field advantage on, now calling for heads to roll. Coming to us from Push Square, opinion, Hermen Hulst has failed and PlayStation Studios needs a change. Now, there's a lot of moving parts here that Push Square kind of assumes you know about as it mentions them during the article, starting off with many of the decisions Jim Ryan, former head of Sony Interactive Entertainment, made during his tenure. And these represent massive amounts of money invested and lost, along with studios pivoting and changing away from what they were historically good at, in order to meet this directive from Mr. Ryan and PlayStation to blitz the market with live service games. Just listen to this veritable graveyard here of either cancellations or studio closure. Starting off with Bend Studios. They were working on some unannounced live service game, and by the way, that was canceled in 2025. And if you don't know who Bend Studios are, they're the studio that made Days Gone. Bluepoint Games was working on a live service God of War game that was also canceled in 25. That studio is now closed, which is a shame because they were actually famous for making high-quality remakes and remasters like the PS5 remake of Demon's Souls or Shadow of the Colossus on PS4. We also, and of course, know about Bungie and Marathon. We'll talk about that more in a second because that game actually did make it to market. Bungie was also working on Payback, which was a game that they canceled in 2024. Firesprite was working on a Twisted Metal live service game that was canceled in 24. Firewalk and the infamous Concord did release and was canceled after a few weeks. Rumor has it that game cost Sony somewhere in upwards of $400 million, and the studio closed shortly thereafter. Guerrilla Games was working on a Horizon Online title that's actually called Horizon Hunters Gathering, which stopped production due to poor playtest feedback. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Haven Studios is still working on a game called Fair Games. Who knows if or when or how well that game will do, if it eventually launches. Insomniac was working on Spider-Man The Great Web, canceled who knows when. London Studios was working on a AAA new IP fantasy multiplayer. That was canceled in 24, and the studio was closed as a result. And then finally, Naughty Dog was working on The Last of Us Factions Online. That was also canceled in 2023. The only one of Ryan's original 12 live service games to survive and actually thrive has been Helldivers 2. And to be fair, it not only survived, it hit new stratospheres for sale numbers, and it's still alive to this day. Also, Helldivers 2 is made by Arrowhead, who are not a Sony first-party studio, and have also already announced that they're working on their next project, which will be independent of Sony. Now, for context, it's also important to know that under Ryan's leadership, Sony acquired Insomniac Games, who are going to be releasing the Wolverine game next month. And for their most famous acquisition, it was Ryan who pushed to acquire Bungie for the insane amount of $3.6 billion. And we see now how that one turned out, as Destiny was killed. Half of the remaining workforce at Bungie was let go, and their only active title, Marathon, which did make it to market, is currently seeing dismal player counts. And for a game like Marathon, in the genre that it is, I have a feeling that the ending is near. However, in the case of studios like the aforementioned Bluepoint, like Insomniac and Naughty Dog, they were pushed by Sony towards a live service genre that they weren't experienced at, with Insomniac only now about to return to its wheelhouse, while Naughty Dog had what sounded like an interesting Last of Us Factions concept pretty much ready to go, only to see that one canceled. And they've now since transitioned back to single-player experiences with their upcoming intergalactic The Heretic Prophet. The point being, with this acquisition and live service bonanza, Sony blew through hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly into the billions with a B, ended up closing some of their historically profitable studios and set even more of their studios back years and years in development, meaning their overall content pipeline has been dry for a while, and this entire venture turned out to be nothing more than a money-burning disaster. Again, the only two to survive out of that original 12 were Helldivers 2 and Marathon. Okay, back to Push Square and their call to oust Hermen Hulst. It says, "Trust me, I don't take any pleasure writing an article like this, but I think Hermen Hulst may need to be ejected from the top job at PS Studios pronto. I've been circling this opinion for quite some time, but today's bad news about Horizon Hunters Gathering is the final nail in the coffin for me. As I said, I don't like writing like this." But Hulst is a well-remunerated exec. That means he's well paid. At the very highest level of a lucrative business, his decisions determine the fate of thousands of employees under PlayStation's umbrella. And while I appreciate many voices contribute to the state of Sony's first party, Hulst has been head of PS Studios since 2019 and currently has the title of CEO of the Studio Business Group. The buck stops with him. It's not all been bad since he took over the job from esteemed executive Shuhei Yoshida. The platform's holders released many successful games like Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Ghost of Yotei. Push Square then goes on to lay out all the missteps and failures we've already covered, from the acquisitions, cancellations, and studio closures, where we pick it up with, quote, "Hulst is acting on a remit from above, and I don't think the pursuit of live service is necessarily wrong. The manufacturer knows the bulk of its revenue is contributed by a handful of evergreen games. But I feel the former Guerrilla managing director has utterly failed to greenlight the right projects. Many of its most important teams now find themselves years behind schedule with no obvious route to success. I think that's underlined by today's Horizon Hunters Gathering reports. According to trusted journalist Jason Schreier, the bulk of the Amsterdam studio has been working on this co-op action game, which is now being repurposed as a smaller scale online product and may yet be canceled if it fails to impress by the end of the year. Meanwhile, a tiny team has been prototyping the true sequel to Horizon Forbidden West, meaning it'll potentially be 5 years or more before the follow-up to Aloy's adventure arrives, assuming Guerrilla even survives that long. What's particularly egregious to me here is that fans have accused Hulst of showing favoritism to the Dutch developer, given his background with the team, and yet even they seemingly find themselves hung out to dry under his leadership. Hulst may not be to blame alone, but he's the man at the top. PS Studios, once the envy of the entire industry, is largely unrecognizable at this point. It'll continue to release successful products in the near future with God of War Laufey, but it's been encumbered by bad decisions that simply can't be ignored anymore. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't know what Horizon Hunters Gathering is, or should I say what it was, but it was this live service co-op experience that you could play solo, where you got to pick from a selection of hunters with roguelite mechanics and various game modes like a defense-style mission and dungeons that used this rather striking, some would actually call it ugly, art style. Essentially, it was about as far away from Horizon Zero Dawn that you could possibly get in every aspect of a game from that universe. And it was met with such overwhelming backlash during its playtest that Guerrilla basically just pulled back on it, even potentially shelving it. And so now the studio has been tasked with tearing down this Hunter's Gathering game, stripping the live service out of it, and to try to turn it into a traditional cooperative multiplayer with a story mode. The team also has, as that response earlier said, until December to impress the Sony brass with their reworks, and the initial feelings are that this will not meet the bar come December, and it's going to be added to the trash pile of Sony's failed live service games. And that's what this call to oust Hulst really boils down to. Failed projects, studio closures, and hundreds of millions of dollars blown through with nothing to show for it. And in the case of Guerrilla Games, they should never have been working on this Hunter's Gathering project, as they already had the widely acclaimed Horizon series under their belts, and should have just instead been focusing on the sequel to Horizon Forbidden West, which I think is kind of par for the course with current-day PlayStation. Huge potential in all the IP they are sitting on, with little to show for it outside of money down the drain and studios getting shuttered. But as always, that's just my opinion on it all. Should Hulst be out at Sony after what the company's games division has been through? Yeah, here's where I turn to you for your feedback on the news and Sony's disastrous live service chase. Drop a comment and let's get a healthy discussion going. If you happen to have liked the video, please consider hitting subscribe and ringing the notifications bell. And before I call it on this one, I'd like to extend a massive shout out to all of our incredible channel members. Until the next one, this is Lieutenant Buzz Lightbeer, signing off.